when we talk about it at our data and research series. And we have had this long professional development series for 36 years. We really value the opportunity to bring folks like yourselves, data users in our communities together so that we can learn and access the latest census data and tell you the most up-to-date trends for the state of Nebraska. However, now my clicker is not working, so 1 second. Thank you for bearing with us.
Use the top button.
That would be the top.
Okay. We got a warning.
However, while tech is not one of our strengths, we also do a lot of community engaged research projects. And if you know us, you know that our summers are really our busy time for these projects. So I just wanted to mention a couple that are coming out within the next few days, weeks, months. A project with Nebraska Cultural Endowment and Amplify Arts about the impact of arts, culture, and humanities in Nebraska. Our 3-year research with the Kauffman Foundation will be coming out in just a few days. So that's really exciting on entrepreneurship. And then we were lucky to have a project in Iowa with the Iowa West Foundation and the Council Bluffs Chamber. And that Josie's already been presenting on that, and that's coming out again in the next few weeks. In addition to our long-standing partnerships with state agencies. So if you're not following us on LinkedIn, please do so, and you'll see all of these when they come out. But like I mentioned, we really value the opportunity to bring you together for the latest census data releases and to talk about some of Nebraska's trends. This is our lineup for today. So we will begin with Mariana McKay, a survey statistician at the U.S. Census Bureau. She's going to give us some of the latest tools, data sets, and innovations at the Census Bureau. Then Josie will take the floor, and she's going to give a presentation with the latest releases from the American Community Survey, Nebraska's demographic, economic, and housing trends, like usual. And then, obviously, as data users, I'm sure you all followed the news. And so within the last several months, we've had lots of questions about safeguarding data integrity and access. And so we thought it was really important to have that conversation here with all of you. In order to do that, we brought in some of our state experts, Katie Thurber and John McCoy are here in the room. And then we also have Beth Jarris. She's going to join us as kind of a national federal expert. And then Donna Ginther, just south of us at the University of Kansas, will be here. So we're excited for that discussion, second half of the morning. At 10:15, we will take a break. And then we will resume at 10:30 for that second panel discussion. Couple housekeeping items before we get started. This QR code on the screen will take you to a web page. There you will find all of the presentation materials from today and the recording when it becomes available. You can also find the evaluation at that link. Please fill out the evaluation so that we can prepare next year's data series with topics that are important to you. If you have a question, look, guys, raise your hands. In the back, we have our student research assistants. Thank you, Nacho, for raising your hand. Ryan and Jungmin, they're all in the black UNO shirts. So if you have a question, raise your hand. They will come and give you the microphone. I know you can be loud, but as you've already seen, we need the microphone so that everybody on Zoom can hear. So please wait until you have the mic to ask your question. For those of you on Zoom, please ask your questions in the Q&A, and then we will monitor that and we will ask them here in the room. I think I hit all my points. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mariana McKay, who is joining us virtually. She is a survey statistician with the United States Census Bureau. Mariana, are you there?
Yes.
Okay. Great. Thank you for joining us.
Of course. I'm trying to figure out. Okay. As long as there's no echo for everybody. I think we're in the clear. So stop me if you're hearing me too many times. And I just wanted to say good morning. Thank you so much for having me. Like I was introduced, I'm a survey statistician at the U.S. Census Bureau. I want to thank you all for inviting me here or there today. I'm kind of sad I can't be in the Gateway of the West. I've never been to Omaha, but one day I'll be there. I hope I can make up for the miles in between us with the information I'm going to share. So today I'm going to go behind the scenes with the ACS, the American Community Survey, to uncover the processes that build the critical pieces that make up the powerful estimates that you all use from the ACS, and that you'll be going through today with other presentations. Woven throughout my presentation, I am going to share some updates on tools, data sets, and upcoming innovations for the ACS itself. So I highly encourage everyone here to check out the ACS Design and Methodology Report if you like what you hear today and you want to learn more. So this report gives a detailed view of what critical processes need to happen and how they happen every year to create the estimates the Census Bureau publishes from the ACS. So the latest version of this report is from December 2024, and it was released earlier this year. So as I go through, you're going to see chapter links at the bottom of each slide that you'll want to check out for more details about that subject itself. So we can go to the next slide. Just to give a little rundown, I'm going to cover how the ACS, American Community Survey, develops its survey sample, how data are collected, how these collected data are prepared, and the data tabulation and dissemination process of the estimates developed from that collected data. And finally, I'll close with some new innovations for the ACS to dazzle and wow you. So let's start with a brief overview of the ACS, so we can go to the next slide. The ACS is the premier source of detailed information about the nation's people and housing. I feel like I don't really need to sell it much with this crowd, but just to give you a little bit more of a background, it samples about 3.5 million housing unit addresses each year. These data are collected continuously throughout the year to produce annual social, economic, housing, and demographic estimates for communities throughout the 50 states, DC, and Puerto Rico. And the estimates cover more than 40 topics. The ACS collects this detailed information each year that was previously collected by the decennial census each decade. ACS data are timely because they are released the following year in which they are collected. So the ACS creates period estimates, which means that they represent the characteristics of the population and housing over a specific data collection period. So we have estimates for 1 year and 5 year periods. The ACS was fully implemented in 2005 after years of extensive testing. The first ACS 1 year estimates were collected again in 2005 and released in 2006. And the first 5 year ACS estimates were collected between 2005 and 2009 and released in 2010. So by the way, if we're keeping count, this is the 20th year of the American Community Survey. So let's go to the next slide. So now that we briefly discussed the program and its history, I want to share the blueprint for today's discussion. So next slide. We are going to start with the survey sample development. So that's how an address gets selected to be included in the ACS. Next slide. Then we're going to go over the way that the ACS collects data from housing units. Next slide. After that, we're going to cover data preparation of the responses. And finally, next slide, we are going to highlight how the results of data preparation are disseminated by the Census Bureau through our various data tools and files, as well as mention some new innovations for the survey itself. So the next slide. The ACS includes both households and group quarters. I want to pause here just for a moment. Group quarters are places where people live or stay in group living arrangements that is owned or managed by an entity or organization providing housing and or services for the residents. So these include, but are not limited to, college or university student housing, so like those of the dorms of University of Nebraska at Omaha. We have residential treatment centers, skilled nursing facilities, military barracks, and correctional facilities. So again, I want to pause here and just recognize that there are critical differences in the sample selection and data collection for group quarters, but I'm not going to address those processes today. We do have a recorded presentation that dives into group quarters should you be interested, or that is a population to which you use the data from the ACS for. But you're going to hear me mention group quarters a little bit throughout the processes, but only when they share the same processes as the housing units. So let's go to the next slide. Let's talk about survey sample development. The next slide we'll talk about is the master address file. And this is the Census Bureau's official inventory of known housing units, group quarters, and selected non-residential units. So that includes public, private, and commercial. units in the United States and Puerto Rico. It is the source of addresses used in the ACS, and it contains mailing and location address info, geocodes, and other attribute info about the living quarter. So a geocoded address is one where a state, county, census tract, and block are identified. The master address file is updated continuously, so it is a dynamic data set. And now the topologically integrated geographic encoding and referencing system is the digital representation of all census-required map features and related attributes. So some of you may know this as the fierce name of Tiger. So the master address file plus the Tiger system makes up the database used to select the sample for the ACS. So this MAF, the MAF, master address file, and the Tiger database is known as the MTDB. And from this database, again, an extract is provided for use in the ACS, which is considered the ACS frame. So go to the next slide. So we want to consider this ACS frame as the bucket of all possible addresses eligible to be sampled in the ACS. There are a few critical requirements. Since the extract must be as complete as possible, there are certain filtering rules during its creation to minimize over and under coverage to obtain an inclusive address list. From the frame, so from this bucket, the sample is selected. Housing units are sampled from 3,144 counties and county equivalents in the U.S. and 78 municipios in Puerto Rico. Next slide. The ACS extract is essentially a cleaned up bucket of eligible addresses that can be sampled for the ACS. So approximately, again, 3.5 million housing unit addresses are sampled from this extract annually. The strategy of sampling here also ensures that the single address is only sampled once every 5 years. So remember, the ACS is address-based, so if a person or if you move within that 5-year period, it is possible that you could be asked to fill out the ACS at both of your addresses there. This ACS extract bucket gets scooped from twice a year. It's called period 1 and period 2. The process during these two periods are essentially the same. The main difference is that if new addresses are introduced to the clean bucket, since the master address file and the ACS extract are dynamic entities, by the time for period 2, that group of new addresses randomly gets assigned to either period 1 or period 2. Period 1 sampling starts around September, the year before the upcoming data collection. So for 2025 data collection, it began in September of 2024. And period 2 starts around March of data collection year. So March 2025 for the 2025 data collection. So once these two periods go through first and second stage sampling, it's time for data collection, and it's time for us to go to the next slide. So let's talk about that. Next slide. Once the sample is selected, it's time to conduct the data collection, which involves several critical stages to allow respondents to securely input their responses to the questionnaire. So let's go to the next slide. Once an address falls into the sample, it's not all in the clear yet. Within a sample address, rules are applied to determine who, if anyone, should respond, and who, according to the ACS, is considered a resident. Oh, let's go back one slide. Sorry. So a current resident in the ACS refers basically to everyone who is currently living or staying at a sample address, except for someone who is there only for a short period of time. So that's defined in the context of the ACS as an expected stay of 2 consecutive months or less, unless those short time period people have nowhere else to go. So let's say you're visiting with a friend over in Lincoln whose house was selected to be in the ACS. You would not be a current resident if you were leaving after a few weeks of your visit. But let's say you signed a 2-year lease with them and moved in yesterday. Since you are planning to stay at that spot in Lincoln for at least the duration of your 2-year lease, you would be considered a current resident. So let's go to the next slide. Before we talk about how we collect the data, let's briefly talk about the questionnaire itself. So the questionnaire is organized into 4 sections that cover housing and person questions. So the first section verifies basic address information, determines the occupancy status of the housing unit, and identifies who should be interviewed as part of the ACS household. The second section collects basic demographic information. The third collects housing information, and the fourth and final collects detailed population data. If you are ever curious about how a question gets added to the ACS, you can check out the recording of a presentation my colleague did earlier this year that gives more details. So let's go to the next slide. Like I just said, the questionnaire is organized into housing and person questions, which cover 4 broad categories of topics. Those are social, economic, housing, and demographic. I want to highlight some of the topics within these sections just briefly. Social characteristics include topics such as educational attainment, marital status, place of birth, and veteran status. Economic characteristics include such topics as employment status, health insurance, and income. Then the ACS also collects that basic demographic characteristics such as sex, age, race, and Hispanic origin. And then housing characteristics include topics such as computer and internet use and housing cost. I do want to mention that we have a few new housing topics, if you didn't know already, that were new questions added in 2025. These include electric vehicles, solar panels, and public sewer connectivity. So now that we know what gets asked on the questionnaire, let's dive into how this information is collected. Next slide. We already established who is considered a resident, so there are now 3 response options available for them to complete the survey. They include online, by mail, or by computer-assisted interviewing with a field representative. So let's go to the next slide to look at those data collection. So the overall sample, which we previously described, is divided into monthly independent samples, which are called panels. Data collection for each panel takes place over a 3-month period, broken up into 2 data collection phases, self-response and non-response follow-up. Typically, for most housing units, the first phase of data collection includes an invitation for the household to respond online, which is mailed to the sample address. If the household does not respond online, a paper questionnaire is sent for the household to complete and return by mail. The first self-response phase lasts roughly 8 weeks or 2 months. In the final 3rd month of the data collection for a panel, the Census Bureau creates a subsample of sample addresses that have not responded or unmailable addresses in the sample that are selected for computer-assisted interviewing. During the second phase for each panel, if any address in the specific subsample submits an online or paper survey, they are removed from the workload. So whether a response is collected via the internet, paper, or through that second phase of non-response follow-up, the questions asked remain the same. So let's go to the next slide. So we have gone through the data collection process from establishing who is considered a resident, to the structure of the questionnaire, to the organization of the sample into panels, and then the 2 data collection phases, self-response and non-response follow-up. Let's go to the next slide. So we can glimpse now at how data are prepared and weighted in anticipation for data releases. Next slide. So as we are going through this journey, we are now at the stage of preparing and processing the data that are collected. It's here where group quarter data are added back into the mix and are subject to the same process. Next slide. Perhaps unsurprisingly, these next few steps in getting the ACS results ready for data users like you of all levels to explore are extremely complex and technical. I'm going to go through this stage at a very broad level. And remember, every month data are collected and received from the ACS, so that means this process is continuous. Next slide. Perfect. So these are the processes I'm going to go over within this data preparation stage. Like I said, there are a lot of critical details within these processes that I'm not going to be diving into right now, especially so early in the morning for you guys. As the data are collected by the 2 modes, so that's self-response or non-response follow-up, they are processed according to the mode that they are submitted. So once they go through their respective intake and process, where, for example, a check of sufficient responses is made, they are organized into one large bucket to continue the preparation process. This bucket is known as the Data Collation Process Files, or DCP. By the end of the data collection year, this bucket will be updated 12 times and becomes the critical source for the next step in getting the data ready. So in the data preparation stage, several key processes occur. First, coding must occur for selected variables that require it. Then an assessment of responses to determine if they are inconsistent, complete, or duplicate is made. Then edits to complete responses or created variables is done. And disclosure avoidance confirms confidentiality of respondents is secured. And finally, weighting ensures that the sample responses are representative of the overall frame. So next slide. So there are several sets of questions on the questionnaire that offer respondents the chance to write in responses. Computers obviously speak a different language than you or I, so putting the responses in number format allow for the data to be machine readable. So some topics that need write-in coding include language, health insurance, internet service, industry and occupation, and geography-based topics like place of birth or place of work. The chart here displays the items that require this step, the write-in response coding. Although the process differs slightly by topic, the general idea is that Census Bureau staff, like me, review these responses and assign them a code using a combination of automated and clerical coding processes. Most of the person characteristics are matched to a data dictionary that contain common responses with a code attached to it. For example, the field of degree question on the ACS questionnaire says, this question focuses on this person's bachelor's degree. Please print below the specific majors of any bachelor's degree that this person has received. If I, as a respondent, wrote sociology on the questionnaire, it would be auto-assigned a code of 5507. So responses in the industry and occupation questions tend to be a little bit more complex and thus are processed using a different system with higher rates of clerical coding. And geocoding is the process of assigning a standardized code of geographic locations. The write-in responses for the questions used to develop these estimates are assessed, and depending on the variable, different levels are applied. For example, place of birth is assigned a U.S. state, District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, a specific U.S. island area, or the foreign country where the respondents were born. Next slide. The next step in data preparation is the edit input process. This involves creating files that analyze several key components of the data in that big bucket of all collected data. So first, the response type. So it's occupied, temporarily occupied, vacant, delete, or non-interview. And the number of people in a household are assessed to figure out if there are any inconsistencies. Second, every return is assessed to determine if there are enough data to consider it complete. And third, if there are duplicate returns, an assessment is made to determine which one will be used. Next slide. Now the next stage is edits and imputation. This begins after the files created in the input file process, the step before this, are generated and verified. So the main steps are editing and imputation, generating recoded variables, reviewing edit results, and creating input files for data products. So let's go to the next slide. So in this first step, the data file that is being worked on here still contains blanks and some inconsistencies. So with missing data, there is a statistical process that many of you are probably aware of called imputation that helps fill in those holes to create a data set that is usable and simple. The rules designed for this step ensure that final edited data are consistent, as complete as possible, and ready for tabulation. Next slide. So this next step calculates new variables based on response data. So this is done to make commonly used complex variables more accessible and to reduce errors that could occur if data users like you are recoding it themselves. So one example here could be poverty status. The ACS does not explicitly ask respondents about their poverty status, so it's in this stage that it is created using respondent income information and household composition. So next slide. After the imputations and recodes are complete, Census Bureau subject matter analysts review the new files and make sure that there are no problems or inconsistencies in the data. And finally, the next slide. Once the files are approved by the subject matter analysts, the files are ready to serve as inputs to the disclosure avoidance and weighting operations. And that's the final steps in the data preparations process. So next slide, let's move right along. Disclosure avoidance is a crucial part of the process in the ACS data preparation to ensure that respondent confidentiality is protected. This means that some data products are modified or suppressed. For example, one disclosure avoidance technique involves selecting a sample of households and matching on a set of selected key variables with households in neighboring geographic areas that have similar characteristics, such as same number of adults and same number of children. Since this swap is done within small geographic areas, there is no effect on the overall totals for an area or among totals that include data from multiple areas. So just to point out, we have an accuracy of the data document that's released with every data release, and it provides more information on confidentiality protections in the ACS. So next slide. We're almost at the home stretch, folks. So weighting is employed to bring the characteristics of the sample close to the true representation of the full population. So going way back to the beginning of this presentation, and it's okay if you forgot that I said this, but I did mention that there are certain filtering rules during the creation of the sample frame to minimize over and under coverage and to obtain an inclusive address list. To adjust for these different rules or sampling rates, weighting ensures that the sample responses are representative of the sample frame itself. So additionally, an adjustment is necessary to capture the housing units that were selected and never responded. And finally, adjustments for coverage error minimize any deficiencies that may occur as a result of the frame itself or varying response rates. So let's go to the next slide. And we're going to talk about data tabulation, and the dissemination process. Sorry, sometimes the Midwest in me comes out. So next slide. There are several series of steps in this process that must be addressed. They include variance estimation, data tabulation, application of data release rules, and then finally data dissemination. Next slide. So the ACS is a survey. I know that should come to no shock as anyone. And that means that the sample we randomly select to respond to the questionnaire provides data that is representative of an entire population. And this is not possible without a level of uncertainty and the variance estimation step. So this uncertainty is known as sampling error. So to help users understand the impact of sampling error on data reliability, we do provide a margin of error for each ACS estimate. Margins of error provide users with a measure of uncertainty for each estimate, which can inform how they use and interpret the estimates. And I'm sure you guys are all familiar with this and you happily use and report those margins of error. So the Census Bureau uses 90% confidence level as its standard, and ACS estimates are therefore published on data.census.gov with that 90% confidence level margin of error calculation. So let's go to the next slide. After the intensive process within data preparation, let me just make sure, are complete and variances are estimated, it is time to create the data products for release. So these include tables, reports, and files highlighting those social, economic, housing, and demographic characteristics. So these data products cover geographic areas of all sizes, again within the United States and Puerto Rico. More than 1,000 tables are published every year. So if you would like to know specifically about the tables and table types that are released with ACS estimates, we do have another recorded webinar that you will want to check out from this year. And also there's a chapter in that methodology report I talked about at the beginning that goes into this. So let's go to the next slide. So now that the data products have been tabulated, it is time for one final check in the data product creation to ensure information about individual respondents is protected and estimates that do not meet statistical standards are not published. So the data release rules focus primarily on geographic area, population thresholds, subpopulation size, and data quality filtering requirements. So population thresholds establish restrictions for the 1 year and 1 year supplemental estimates. So just for review, the 1 year, geographies with populations of 65,000 or more are available, and for 1 year supplemental estimates, that threshold is 20,000 or more. And the 5 year estimates are not subject to geographic-based population thresholds. So data products that focus on specific subpopulations have additional thresholds to further protect privacy and ensure data quality. So data quality filtering, which is also applicable to just the 1 year and 1 year supplemental estimates, is implemented to ensure that the ACS data meet the Census Bureau's statistical standards for reliability. For example, if more than half of the estimates in a single table are not statistically different from 0, the table is not published. So you might find tables in data.census.gov that have empty cells. That means that estimate did not meet a threshold to be published. But sometimes tables just do not exist for certain geographies because of this data quality filtering. So finally, the Census Bureau Disclosure Review Board, or DRB, establishes additional rules such as minimum unweighted sample requirements for certain types of estimates, such as medians, means, or aggregates. Next slide. So now this is the fun part, at least to me. It's time to get the data products out to the public for all of your use. With every data release, there is a release schedule and a plan to disseminate the data for use. This includes disseminating the data across numerous platforms, some of which you are probably familiar with, like data.census.gov, the application programming interface, summary file, and other key tools developed and maintained by the Census Bureau. Typically, the data release season begins around September, the calendar year after data collection. So 2024 data are starting to be released. We released the 1 year on September 11th, so a couple weeks ago. So let's go to the next slide. We're in the final section here. We're going to talk about some new innovations for the ACS. I know you guys are super excited, I hope, to hear. So next slide. We can go to the next slide here. I do want to take some time to highlight these new innovations for the American Community Survey. If you'd like to read more, I highly encourage to check out the Agility in Action report or reports. This provides updated information about the evolution of the ACS itself. So first, I want to highlight the efforts of the ACS team to incorporate administrative data into the data collection and production process. To highlight this innovation, I'm going to focus on a very exciting topic, which is the acreage question. So this question on the survey asks, how many acres is this house or mobile home on? There are 2 points in which administrative data come into play. In the electronic instrument, so when a respondent is responding via the internet, when an address is randomly selected to be in the sample, it's run through a system to determine if there are any records of that property with acreage information. If it is sufficient, the question about acreage is immediately removed from that household questionnaire. This cannot obviously be done on the paper form, but at least for the electronic, it is removed. The second point in which it comes into play is once the survey response is entered and the processing for it begins, the administrative record with the acreage information is added into it. So this effort to decrease respondent burden also bleeds into efforts to modernize and expand the electronic data collection instrument for the ACS. And then another one that I want to introduce is for non-institutional group quarters, so that includes student housing, group homes, and military barracks. We have added an internet self-response option for respondents. So prior to 2024, believe it or not, data collection efforts for these group quarters were paper questionnaires, telephone, or in-person interviews only. So think about that in dorm rooms. I know once I graduated, I was done being in there. So I highly encourage you to check out, again, the Agility in Action report series for any and all updates about improving the operations for the ACS. So let's go to the final slide. So as I bid you farewell, I just want to pitch a few ways for you guys to keep in touch with us after today. One way is sharing your ACS data story. I'm sure there's a lot of you in here who have used the ACS to make a difference in your community. And if you are someone who has used the ACS, please consider submitting your story with us today. You can also sign up for and manage email updates from us here at the ACS. We release a monthly events and updates email that's going to alert you when new material are available, any upcoming events, and more information about data releases. And finally, no matter where you are in your ACS data journey, if my mention is the first mention you've ever had of it, or you've been using it every day since 2005, or 2006 rather, we have a team here, acso.users.support@census.gov, that includes me and several of my colleagues that are more than willing to help you. So I thank you so much. I know I went over time, but again, if we don't have time for questions here, we can absolutely, you can send them to that address and I am available to respond.
Thank you. Thank you, Mariana. Everybody's going to clap, even though you can't hear that.
I hear it. Thank you, thank you.
So we do, first of all, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, I was just going to say, you're a data nerd if you think that's interesting. Am I right? I thought it was super cool and we use it all the time, but to get kind of the in-depth look at it is really interesting. We have time for questions in the room if there's anybody. Josie has a couple.
Mine.
No, use this one too. Mariana, thank you so much for being here. It's been a couple of years since we had a deep some of the research methods as part of this series. I think it was really necessary. So I had a couple things, and honestly, she said a lot of things I don't know. So I don't want to say that I'm just like setting these questions up. We get a couple of questions every year from folks about the master file. And like, do we have access as the state data center to your addresses? We do not. But can you just address that for a little bit? Like, how deeply guarded is your master file?
I would say so deeply guarded that I've never been close to it. It is within, I believe, our geography department is the primary keeper of that. But I would say it's an extraordinarily, most of our stuff, as all of the data that we collect, is pretty secure and it doesn't get shared outside of the Bureau. So I can get more specifics on who is in charge of that, but I would say for the most part, it's a very difficult, unless you work with it, you're not going to be seeing it, or accessing it for that matter.
No, that's what I thought, but I think it's really important that other people know.
Yeah. And that goes the same for, sorry, I just want to emphasize that also goes for the same. I know many of you are probably working in communities where there might be very low trust in the government, and that's something that we work with every day. Respondent data are protected and secured with the utmost. That is part of the oath that we take. So when a respondent's information is collected, it is just as secure.
Okay. Can you tell me about response rates over time to the ACS?
Yes, we actually do publish annual response rates on our ACS webpage, and allocation rates and coverage rates. So if you look at that, you can view it over time. That I don't think it's crazy to say the response rates have been decreasing for a whole host of reasons, but it's still, I believe, in the high 90s nationwide, but depending on the state, there are higher and lower response rates. Unfortunately, Nebraska doesn't lead the top. I believe Minnesota is typically at the top for highest response rates. So you can start to get competitive with them.
For the 2020 census, we were in the top 5.
Okay, that's great. Let's get you in the top 1 for the ACS.
Anybody here starting to think of some questions? I maybe have 1 or 2 more, but I just want to make sure. Oh, we have one.
I've got one Zoom participant, so a few actually. So Marianne, Nathan is asking, how does the ACS, including the master file, account for farm and ranch workers who reside entirely on ranches, dairy farms, or stables, including U.S. citizens and H-2A migrant employees?
So I will say, again, the address file is for housing units. So my assumption would be if it's a ranch, it has an actual address. We work with the USPS, so the Postal Service, and we also have our own, we have our own collection too. So we are combining multiple things. So if it is a ranch or a dairy farm or stable, it's going to have an address. I can't speak to the residents that are selected within that household, but if it is a unit with an address, it's going to be included. And I understand that we're probably talking more about like the housing units within a ranch, and I can't speak to that. It wouldn't be considered a group quarter in my mind. So it would likely be that the address that's selected is going to be like the main house of the ranch.
Thank you. And as a follow-up, how does the ACS account for agricultural workers or others who might migrate with harvest or perform sort of temporary work?
So again, the ACS follows housing units, not people. So we would only be if the address selected houses temporary employees, again, we would have to determine if they're there for 2 months or less, or if they have nowhere else to go, then we would determine if they're a resident or not to be able to go forward with interviewing them.
Thank
And,
you.
Last one from Michael. Does the ACS attempt to determine new housing units where in say unincorporated villages that don't require permits?
I would like the person who asked this to send it to the email, because that is going to be a softball question for the team that works on the building permit survey, but that is not me. So I would want to get them a more complete answer.
Thanks, Marianne.
Thanks, Mariana. We appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for your work as a federal employee and a public servant. We know how important you are to everything we do in the state of Nebraska and our state data center. So we really appreciate your time today and sharing your expertise with us. And they're going to have to start you again.
Thank you. And I hope next year I can join you guys over there and enjoy everything that Omaha has to offer.
We would love that. All right. Next up, we are going to switch to Dr. Josie Schaefer, CPAR Director. Josie's going to share some of the latest ACS releases with you all.
Hi, everybody. How are y'all?
Did you, I loved that. Was that too much for people, or was that, okay? We haven't done the deep dive in a while, so I thought it was time. Really, it fits within this conversation today, right? We need access to good data. And good data means that level of work. So, I love a poll. We do our own original surveys, nowhere near the effort that they're putting in to make that data trustworthy, to make that data reliable, to make that data actually representative of the sample. Are we working that hard? And no throw-up poll is ever going to capture what they're capturing at the level of reliability that we didn't have in that. And I think unless you see that, sorry, I'm talking now. Unless you see how much work goes into it, unless your mind numbs over for a second, then we just can't differentiate it from other types of work. So moving into today, there's all this front end work that has to go into making data from the Census Bureau reliable. And then we need to share out data. And that is not a simple process either. And that's kind of what I want to talk about, moving from this data reliability to actually using data and data direction. But just because I can trust that data doesn't mean I can share and call it a day. And I mean, believe me, my job would be easier if I could just share it and call it a day. But we can't do that. So I want to talk. I'm going to try to do a couple different things with this presentation like I usually do. Everybody wants to see some of the 2024 one-year estimates, what's new from the ACS. So we're going to show some of that. And we don't use the one-year estimates a lot because in Nebraska, we have a lot of small populations. They're not available in one-year data. But I'm going to try to show some of what's new. But I'm really going to talk about this idea of data direction. How do we use data in a meaningful way and not just show stuff, throw it out there and call it a day, but actually start to build some reliability into our analysis, the way they build reliability. So I'm going to organize it around these two concepts, indicators versus trends. Indicators are single data points. The ACS is full of indicators. And we need those indicators. We want to know what is happening. We want to get a snapshot of the world today. That is why we have these timely releases of data. But they are just that. They're a single point in time. They don't tell us if it's up, if it's down, if it's comparable, if it's not comparable. It just is. So it helps us filter a lot of data. They're meaningful when we make them meaningful. Jim, right here, I'm going to call you up. His intern the other day said, we need data on businesses. I need more information than that. So give me some of your indicators. It's actually the word I use. So tell me what are the things you care about so I can tell you what we have. Those are indicators. But indicators can be a little unhelpful or misleading, right? Like if I tell you 50%, that's meaningful to people. It's at half, but is that good? Is that bad? Of what, right? And so we want to start looking at trends. And I'm using trends broadly. Trends specifically means an over time analysis, looking at things, how they change over time and in what ways. But I'm also saying just sort of in relationship, making things, contextualizing things, smoothing out some noise, trying to get some patterns, like what is happening here. And ACS is really good about jumping in or something. But it's not great about helping you look at trends. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how I do that to get started. You just saw a great presentation on the American Community Survey, so I'm not going to go over this in detail. We have a very detailed slide like this in almost every presentation we do. Just a reminder, today I'm going to be mostly showing you the 2024 one-year estimates as compared to the 5-year estimates. That would have been a great question to ask Mariana about the differences. It is not a simple average of the 5 years, but it is a smoothing of the trend over time. It's related to their weighting procedures. 3.5 million respondents annually is a lot. Compare that to a Pew Research poll, 1,500 respondents nationally, maybe, right? I just want to point out the difference. But even then, they don't feel totally comfortable putting that number out there. They're going to use 5 years of data to make sure that that number is really meaningful and lower that margin of error. Nonetheless, there is a margin of error on the same. I like go out and talk to people and they're like, I know somebody that's not right. Correct. I didn't beat it to the number. I never did. But they are surveys and they're trying to give us those numbers for context, for meaning, but it's not always going to do it. Here's the release schedule. So this one-year data came out September 11th. In December, we're going to have the 5-year release. That has much more data because of the population. It does not make the data available under 65,000 people in population. In the 1 year, we have a lot of geographies that are smaller than. So we tend to do a longer presentation on sort of what's going on when that 5-year release comes out. Here, I'm just going to talk about some of the things I'm seeing that have changed. So, like I said, this is the ACS through data.census.gov. Who is a data.census.gov actual user? Yeah, I would bet that through today, like, more of the actual users. We get a lot of people that don't ever get on it or not, so it's always hard to gauge the presentation. But you get on. I always do this, and I suggest this in other presentations. Just type in DP. And there's 4 demographic profiles tables that are really good overviews of what's out there. Especially if you're not a common user, these are going to give you a really good, like, okay, I get it. You know that I saw someone take a picture of the Mariana's table about what is available from the ACS, demographics, housing, social. These 4 tables will give you a really good overview. By the way, here's some margins of error. This is for Nebraska. They're not nothing. 2,000 this way or that way. I was with the Bankers Association yesterday, and they were like, 2,000 is a lot. I was like, you're counting money, I'm counting people. 2,000 is nothing with people in the state. I would imagine if you guys were 2,000 off of that, something bad has happened, but it's different for us. You get the percent margin of error. Notice that the percent margins of error are smaller. That is a statistical thing, and that's why we tell people to use percentages more often. Going to the number is not really helpful. I can talk about that later. But now, does anybody know anything more about housing than they knew when they walked in from this table? Not really, right? And that was the point. Indicators are just that. They're interesting, but I don't really know where we were to start. I didn't know anything about this. I don't even know if anybody cares anything about this. You really have to approach this data with questions. And that's what the Census Bureau is going to do. They're going to make sure you have access to data. But that doesn't mean it answers questions for you. Here's an interesting thing I tend to look at as soon as the new releases come out. These are the comparison profiles. Go to data.census.gov, type in CP. You're going to get for those same DP tables, these CP tables, these comparison profiles. And they're going to compare every data point that's on these slides, the DP ones, by year and they're going to give you statistical significance. Statistical significance is a weak test that the effect is real versus just random. And this is really important, particularly in survey research, because we're asking a random sample of people to do stuff. We know there's some margin of error. We know things don't change that much year to year. Everyone's like, I don't even know this data. No, you don't. It all looks the same. Wish things changed more dynamically in Nebraska than they did. They don't. So year to year, you're going to find differences. Are they real differences? Are they meaningful differences? Are they statistically significant? They're not just random, right? And so here we have one. So that's that little star right there. I know it's a little hard to see people, and I can see it a little better. But we have an indicator. Median value of owner-occupied housing units in Nebraska, 2024 is 263,100. If you go back to 2023, it was 252,400, and it gets a star. That means it is not random that that number is up. We believe it is up. Is anybody shocked that housing values are up? No, not at all, right? But they are up. If you go back to the 2022 estimate, they were up. If you go back to the 2021 estimate, they were up. Now, if you look at this whole table, there's a lot of things that don't have the star. They're up, they're down, but they don't have the star, which means there's a chance it's just like a random difference, probably a small difference. It's not a meaningful difference, right? It is a pretty weak test. It is not a test of the actual it's up or it's up a lot. It's not random. It's not random. So we have a trend. So when I start to see a trend, I want to know more about it. And that's why I sort of approach these tables, not necessarily straight from the indicators. You know, we have a set of indicators we track over time. So there are things I do care about and really looking for in this data. But when I'm saying like, hey, what's new? This comparison profile table is a great way for me to know, wow, something's up, something's down. There are things that are down and something as well. And it's across all of those TP tables, demographics, social, economic, and housing. So I get a really nice overview of what's changed. So that's how I approach this presentation and this idea of indicators for trends. So let's see it in context a little bit more. This isn't a trend, it's a comparison, it's a relationship. Here's how our median home values do across the state. Just like our geography, it's in the middle. 263,100 really isn't very important or like amazing compared to the coast. Even within the region, it's not the highest, but it's not the lowest, right? So median home values are actually fairly affordable from this lens. Does anybody feel median home prices are very affordable right now to people? No. So if I present a slide like that, no, right? Right, and that's what you get with an indicator. Even putting it in some context, it really doesn't tell a full and complete story. And we're just seeing so much of that in research right now. And it's honestly all we can take sometimes, right? Like, really can only take like a, oh, good point. But if we don't go diving deeper, we're never going to answer real questions about these things. We're just going to get tables of things next to each other and say, look, there's a relationship. No, there's not. I'm talking about a very specific report. You asked me off well. Want to know. Here is a really interesting trend in those median values of owner-occupied units. 2016, you got to pick a benchmark here. I picked 2016 for a few different reasons. It's not too important. I'm going to run out of time. But here are the median values in the gray bars. The annual percent change in the red. What I notice here is, so a couple things. One, we're up. And you get the overall percent change over there is 78%. That sounds like a lot. This isn't that many years back. That sounds like a lot. Here are your annual percent changes. They're smaller here than over here. You had a big jump coming out of COVID. Why do I have 2020 blocked out? 2020 is blocked out because in 2020, the American Community Survey only released the 5-year estimates. They were really busy doing the 2020 census, so they only released the 5-year estimates. 5-year estimates and 1-year estimates are not comparable. There are groups of people who will post them together. It's not good. It's not helping analysis. It's not moving us forward. So I just left it out. Does anybody think it was like suddenly down here or something? No, right? Like it's a trend. And that's what's great about trend analysis. We can kind of fill in a lot of blanks because we know what the relationship is. It's up. I'm not worried about that 2020 data. And we start to see that percentage changes have increased more recently than they were. They've been increasing over time, but something's up here. So 78%. That sounds like a lot to me. Let's put that. Oh, not that. Okay. Another research concept that I think is really important and is going to become more important as a lot of these data systems are becoming less available. Triangulation. There's a lot of different ways in research design to talk about triangulation. We use it in a lot of different ways. We do a lot of mixed methods research, so we might have some quantitative indicators as well as some interviews, as well as an online survey. Here, I'm going to actually use some other data sources. If public data starts to go away, we will have to fill in with other data sources. They will not be as reliable as the ACS or other big national data sets, but there is going to be a push for more private data. So we have to learn how to use it together to make a really good point. So here I'm going to look at some Zillow data. Zillow data is great. They make it really easy to use, especially, but it only answers housing questions. And in Nebraska, I get a lot of pushback that not every house that goes for sale is on Zillow. And that is likely true, particularly in rural areas of the state. So that's an issue. I show a lot of Department of Labor, the AnyWorks website, and I would say, not every job posted, not every job that's open is posted. Do you get that a lot? I can't show it without someone like screaming at me. That's why we triangulate data, right? That's why we triangulate data. This actually matches up really well to the ACS data. So I went back, this is monthly data. I went back to 2016. Here's the 2024 number. I'm sure if I averaged it, it would be very close to the ACS data. And by the way, it's up in 2025, so we know the trend continues. But I'm not that worried about using that 2024 number, right? Like I said, everyone's like, I need the newest data. And in housing, it can be, right? And especially there's seasonal fluctuations. Houses are more expensive in the summer than the winter. But when you smooth all that out, 82% change versus 78% change. I feel really confident we're capturing the same thing here. So now I can use the Zillow data, I can use the ACS data, I can go to 2025, I can stick with 2024, but I start to feel a lot more confident about what I'm looking at. So this is the percent change in the Zillow home value index, which is what I'm using here by state. So now I'm going back to the by state example, but I'm using the trend instead of the value. Because we know that value made us look short, but that trend is really important. And look at that, we actually really stand out at that 81.9% or 82% change. You see a lot of other states are higher, but actually in the region, we now really stick out. So that indicator is not very high. That trend is up. Now we put that trend in comparison, and then we see a really interesting relationship. Home values have risen a lot for Nebraskans, and that home value rise is greater than much of the rise in the region. This really raises questions about affordability, right? The coasts are less affordable when we look just at that indicator, but that increase in our prices over time is something we're going to feel and that we really need to understand a bit more about. Now, so the Census Bureau in their one-year release also pointed out this cost of home ownership continues to rise. Our cost of home ownership was not statistically significant. So there is another indicator, it's not just the overall values, but that monthly housing costs, and that's what a lot of people are saying. Insurance, plus the higher interest rates, cost of home ownership has really risen. That was not statistically significant up or down. It's actually down slightly in 2024, but it wasn't significant. So what I would say is it's kind of the same. So that was not an interesting one for us. So we wanted to keep going in a little bit more. Here's the comparative table for economic characteristics, and we do see some significant differences in incomes. So median household income in dollars was not significant, but it was down. Now, you never judge that. A lack of statistical significance isn't meaningful. Research design people love that. It's not meaningful. Look, I'm walking down. Flip the walk, sorry. But the mean household income was statistically significant, and it was up a little bit, but not very much at all. So it seems to me that the median home prices are moving, but incomes are not. So I wanted to look at that a little bit more. Here's that same time period, 2016 to 2024, couple different metrics. Between 2016 and 2024, things changed, I promise. Median earnings for workers, per capita income, and then that median household income, percent change CPI adjusted, so adjusting for inflation, which is up. Well, that's not much change at all. Think back to how much our housing values have changed, right? 78%, 82%, whatever, which one you want to use. And it's the same time. So I think we've kind of made a point just by showing some indicators and a little bit of that trend. Housing prices have gone up faster than folks' incomes. We can see that here. This is actually an indicator from the Census Bureau about being housing cost burden. So spending 30% or more of your income on housing. About 25% of folks, a quarter of folks that own a home, are housing cost burden. Again, this is not a perfect indicator. You have people that have owned a home for a really long time in Nebraska. They're likely to not be housing cost burden. They paid the mortgage over a ton of time. They got it at lower interest rates. Their incomes are maybe now retirees, but they're stable. So 25%. It's not super high in the region or nation, but with a group of us that feel that pressure. Here it is for renters. It's much higher. It's much higher in every state, 50%. But again, this is still, even though it is kind of looking at two things at the same time, the cost of housing as well as incomes, it is not necessarily capturing a trend. This isn't either, but I really wanted to look at affordability from the idea of someone trying to buy a house right now. Right, so these metrics are counting everybody who is either in a house or renting a house and how that relates to their income. So this was just like some very minor analysis, just looking at current interest rates. You want to spend less than 30% of your income. So on housing. So in 2016, about 75% of the population could buy a house at the median value, based on just those couple of things, interest rates, incomes. About 75% of the population, that sort of day in 2016, they wanted to buy a house at the median home price in Nebraska. They could do it. Today, it's 50%, little less. And again, I'm being really generous. So it's actually not everybody. So what that's saying is that young professionals group that right now wants to go out and buy a house is going to feel much more stretched than someone in 2016. And this is where we really get at what these trends mean, what those differences are. How do we look at this number in a more nuanced and complex way than just, here, that's the home price, it's not that bad with you. Don't move together. So we see that the income indicators have grown, but the trend, especially adjusted for inflation, shows that they haven't grown enough to keep up with the housing values. And when we continue to look at that, there's a group of people that are going to feel stretched. Here's some triangulation. This is the young, I'm walking again. This is the young professional survey from the Omaha Chamber. And we asked young professionals, hey, what are the big issues to you? Cost of housing was a major issue for them. Now, could I take that alone and just say housing is a problem in Omaha? Yeah, I could. But would I be doing a real service in triangulating data and confirming empirically for people that their perceptions are one accurate And now I'm starting to put some numbers to it. So if we wanted to do something about it, we actually know what the numbers are and how to work with it. And so I think the survey data is really important. It becomes the thing that I didn't say it's better. We're all saying it's better. Probably didn't need that much work to do that. But that's what I think is really important about that concept of triangulation. We're starting to put numbers around what does that actually mean. When they say cost of housing was a problem, what do we mean? I don't have much time, but I feel very strongly that sort of dropping this idea of incomes haven't gone up enough is really never going to change anything. Right? Like, I would love to just tell businesses to pay more, but John, would that work? Yeah. Supply and demand is such that that's not going to work. And that's exactly why I spend most of my other presentation times on this occupational composition question. Right? Where we get our income from, where we get our earnings from, to me is more interesting than what our earnings are. Because there are differences. People in this room get paid different amounts based on what they do. And that's really important. We did notice some statistically significant trends. Sales and office occupations are down. Production, transportation, and material moving occupations are up. There's some movement in some of the other ones, but they are not significant. This is very much related to some data we presented in May. But this was by Metro, and we showed that the relationship was positive and significant between growth in high-wage jobs and domestic in-migration, people moving to those places. This is a major discussion in our state right now, so I just wanted to bring back that we have a lot more data on that and that high-wage data change. But you can see that there. Here I've gone and arrayed those full-time jobs. These are occupations for full-time workers. I get a lot of questions why I sometimes show all workers for full-time workers, so I won't talk about it. But here's that trend. We do see a lot of growth in computer and math. We also see a lot of growth in material moving. That's the transportation, the production, transportation, occupation job that's changed. The high wage jobs are in red. Sorry, we got to get you guys to a break. I don't want to go on those panels, and then you see some of those jobs changing, declining. I triangulated that with some BLS data. I made it look ugly just so you know that that's what BLS data looks like. It can be downloaded. A lot of people don't know how to work with BLS data. Even our own federal government doesn't understand BLS data compared to Census Bureau data. It's very different. Capturing it is different. It's administrative data. It updates. It's different. But these are actually their projections out to 2034. This column here is what I sorted on. Just to show that actually the national projections for growth changes look really similar to what we're doing, but that movement in material moving as a transportation job is a pretty low wage job, and that's grown a lot here, and that's kind of interesting. And that's why I really haven't seen much movement in our density of high wage jobs and the fact that states around us are growing those high wage jobs faster. Going back to that slide from May, that is my major point here at CPAR. I'm making it all the time in all sorts of ways. Growth in high wage jobs is driving people out of the state. It's the explanation, my explanation for brain drain, for just domestic outmigration. I think it's really important. And so I am going to wrap it up and let y'all take a break, but you're going to have access to all of these slides and come back to data series. I talk about this all the time, so you're not missing anything. Let's take a break and then we have some awesome panels for you. Thanks, y'all.
All right, everybody, welcome back. We are welcoming Katie Thurber and John Foy here in person, and Beth Jarris and Donna Ginther online. We're switching to the handheld mics in the room. Hopefully that will work better for our folks on Zoom. So when we were putting together this data series session a couple months ago, we really were thinking about all the conversations that are happening at the national level and locally about data integrity and access to data, and how important the federal statistical system is in making sure that us in Nebraska communities have access to this important data that tells us so much about the demographic, economic, and housing trends that Josie just kind of shared with us. And so we wanted to bring that conversation here, and to do so, we really felt like it was important to have the national perspective, a regional perspective, and then also what's happening here in our state. So we have Beth Jarris joining us. She's a senior fellow with Massive Data Institute at Georgetown University. She's also the vice president of the Association of Public Data Users. We have Donna Ginther, director of the Institute for Policy and Social Research at the University of Kansas. She's also a research associate with the National Bureau of Economic Research. And then we have Pete Gerber right here to my right, commissioner with the Nebraska Department of Labor, and John McCoy, a veteran data series presenter. Welcome back, John. We didn't scare him away, so that's good. Associate economist with the Omaha branch of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. So we're going to start national, and then we'll work our way down to the local level. So Beth, thanks for joining us. We're going to let you take it away, and I am controlling your slides. So when you need a slide move, just tell me and I will hit the next button.
Thank you so much. I think next slide, please.
And this is our guiding question, my apologies. So we asked all of our speakers today to think about this question: what will it take to protect the credibility and availability of data in a time of rapid change and growing skepticism? Okay, Beth.
Perfect. I repeated that question. So when I thought about how to answer that question, the first thing I realized is that we might not all have the same base of knowledge about what that rapid change is, because there has been so very much. So I wanted to, next slide, please, just start with a little bit of background. First of all, the changes didn't start in 2025. The federal statistical system was showing some signs of weakness even coming into this year. So a couple of examples from 2024. For those of you who use the American Community Survey, that survey started about 25 years ago, and the sample size is approximately the same today as it was in 2005, even though the US population has grown. So the sample size has not kept up with population growth, and response rates have been falling. So the quality of the data is still very good, but has degraded over time. The current population survey, which is where we get a lot of our unemployment rate and job data from, last summer faced budget cuts and a sample size reduction. That was averted. They did end up finding the funds to keep the sample size the same, but there were already some warning signals we were seeing. The Bureau of Labor Statistics scaled back reporting on certain consumer price series, and the Bureau of Economic Analysis, which is really one of our most comprehensive sources of, I know everyone talks about BLS for jobs data, but the Bureau of Economic Analysis captures a much broader segment of jobs. They do a good job of capturing farm work, self-employment, non-wage and salary data. Bureau of Labor Statistics tends to focus on those wage jobs. BEA fills in the gig work, the commission-based jobs as well. And they had discontinued state and county employment, farm income, and national self-employment by industry. So lots of data were already starting to be less robust coming into this year. Next slide, please. And then the pace of threats sped up exponentially. I have been tracking data and working with data for 25 years and have never seen the rate of data loss and discontinuations that I've seen this year. So just the highest level, we have seen dramatic cuts to budgets, contracts, and staff. For example, the Census Bureau needs geographic information systems, GIS tools, to do their work. That contract was cut. Sort of fundamental to their work. We've seen the widespread discontinuation of data, and I'll talk about that some more in a moment. The deletion of taxpayer-funded public data, tools, and websites. Some of those have been restored based on court orders, but a lot of data still are gone. The termination of scientific advisory committees. These are a really sort of geeky, behind-the-scenes tool. Academics, researchers, people from the business community who are the best and brightest statisticians, researchers, data methodologists, members of the community representing their constituencies, volunteer their time. So this is not a paid position. There was no budget savings from this, but scientific advisory committees across the statistical system, Census Bureau, economic statistics, all of them were terminated. So that was an important mechanism for unbiased oversight, an important mechanism for driving innovation, and those have been terminated. There are reports of unauthorized access to confidential data, including a recent whistleblower case from the Social Security Administration that all of our data potentially have been exposed in the cloud in unsecured ways. And even if it turns out that's not true, although we have reason to think it is, even if it's not, people are going to trust the government even less. They're going to be even less likely to respond to the American Community Survey, even less likely to respond to the Current Population Survey or National or Health Survey that they receive in the mail. In addition, there have been lots of removals of agency leaders for political reasons. I know the removal of the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics got a lot of press, but she certainly is not the only one. National Center for Education Statistics, IRS, Social Security Administration, there have been, and most recently, just this past Friday, the acting director of the Census Bureau have been replaced, and the chief statistician has been replaced by a political appointee. So some real concerns there. Next slide, please. And so talking about some specific examples, we know that the Bureau of Labor Statistics Commissioner was removed, but in addition, the Bureau of Economic Analysis has delayed or discontinued many data series, and these include things like state and local farm and non-farm employment, transfer payments, and lots of other state series. These are a really crucial source of data on gig work, on family farms, on transfers to farmers. If they're getting subsidies from the government, how much income does that account for? A lot of those data series have been suspended. And so we're sort of flying blind on a lot of the agricultural sector, for example. Next slide, please. Price data is another one. This one's really key because of budget cuts and staff reductions. The Bureau of Labor Statistics suspended Consumer Price Index data collection in 3 cities, including in Nebraska, Buffalo, Lincoln, and Provo. And in all other places, they reduced sample size collection by about 15%. Now, very recently, they announced that they're going to hire a handful of additional workers, but we have not seen any evidence that there's going to be a return of sample size or a return to data collection in those 3 places. In addition, for those of you who work in industry, about 350 producer price indices data collections were suspended. And of course, why does this matter? CPI sets cost of living increases for Social Security. It's used for safety net programs. Some companies use it to adjust their annual wages and salaries. And then, of course, businesses use the producer prices for planning. So less data and less high quality data really is problematic for all of those reasons. Not getting the inflation number right potentially means billions of dollars in spending too high or too low in those programs. Next slide, please. And then the American Community Survey, which is our most robust, most comprehensive source of data, particularly for rural areas. There are proposals in the current budget bill that's going through Congress to make the American Community Survey voluntary and to limit response for any data collections at the Census Bureau to 2 contacts. And that means they could send you a mailer and they can knock on your door 1 time. And typically less than half of people respond by that second attempt. And so if the Census Bureau is limited to just 2 contact attempts, the quality of our data, particularly for small populations in rural areas, is really going to suffer. This has made it through the House budget bill. It is not in the Senate. It's sort of an open question as to whether it's going to go forward, but I suspect even if it doesn't move forward this year, this threat to data quality will persist. And of course, in addition to poorer data quality, there's loss of public trust. If the public doesn't feel like the data that they're getting out of these surveys reflects their community, they're going to be even less likely to participate in the future. Next slide, please. So then that's just scratching the surface of what's happened. There have been other recent changes. There is a data collection on food security from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. That has been suspended, and a really critical survey of farm worker, the National Agricultural Workers Survey, has also been suspended. So these changes, and we're hearing about that just in the last week. So these changes are ongoing and happening very rapidly. So with all of that, what does it take to protect the credibility and availability of data. Next slide, please. And I would say it takes all of us. Everyone in that room is critically important to protecting the credibility and integrity of data. And there are some specific things that you can do. Next slide, please. For early warning signs, colleagues have put together a project called dataindex.us, hopefully fairly easy to remember. And what that project is doing is tracking these changes. So there are about 25 data sets that the team is currently monitoring very specifically on the website, but also a much broader infrastructure behind the scenes where we are reading through public notices about discontinuations. We are reading through potential, opportunities for comment and sending out a weekly newsletter about here are the 3 things you need to know this week and how you can take action. You can submit a comment on this one. You can write a letter to the head of this agency with some very specific actions that you can take. Next slide, please. And then in addition, a much more rapid response and peer-to-peer is that Population Reference Bureau has started something called the Federal Data Forum. And it's a place where people who are hearing these rumors of data changes have an opportunity to comment about it, but also to advocate and get people, one, just knowing the scope and the frequency of these changes, but also explaining, again, that how to take action. Here is a group that is working to organize to collect and preserve historical data. Here's how you would get involved with them. Here is a group who's tracking agricultural data specifically. Here's how you would get involved with them. And so we're really finding that peer-to-peer information sharing is helping to fill some gaps in the information system and to help keep people up to date on how they can respond. Next slide, please. And thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Beth. Well, you are applauding for you. I just wanted to follow up on a couple things. First of all, I think the awareness piece from Beth's presentation is so important. There are so many great resources so that you can stay informed. I know sometimes it feels like an influx of what's coming at you from the news, but it's really important. And that, just on a personal note, that Federal Data Forum is really helpful just to get that in your inbox every day and see the trends that are happening. And if you want to pursue it, you can. So thank you, Beth, and we'll move on to Donna. Welcome.
Well, thank you. I'd like to go to the next slide, please. I'd like to talk about regional data. So if we can go to the next slide. I direct the Institute for Policy and Social Research at the University of Kansas. I like to say we're the intellectual home for social science research at KU. Next slide. Our mission is to support fundamental cross-disciplinary research on social problems and issues, to support our faculty and staff and students in doing social policy research. We work closely with the state of Kansas, local governments, and federal government on policy-related work, and we're trying to create an intellectual home at the University of Kansas. Next slide, please. We are also home to the Kansas State Data Center. We partner with the U.S. Census Bureau, and we work with the Census Bureau to provide training and assistance in the use of census data. We provide feedback on products and data. We assist with drawing the public use micro areas within the state. And we've been doing this since 2018. So we are very engaged with the Census Bureau and looking at the quality of their data. The next slide, please. We also produce the Kansas Statistical Abstract, which is based on federal and state data. This is the 59th edition. And so this was modeled after the United States Statistical Abstract. We cover topics such as agriculture, banking, business and industry, climate, communications, courts, education, employment, energy, government, housing and construction, income, parks, population, you name it. If it's measured, it's in the Kansas Statistical Abstract. Next slide, please. But a lot of the issues that Beth raised have really affected us in Kansas. First of all is that data is disappearing. So this is an article that was published in The Conversation. Next slide, please. Margaret Levenstein and Jonathan Kubel from the University of Michigan wrote about this problem. The federal government has eliminated so many workers that few people remain to vet the data and process requests. The Census Bureau has lost over 1,000 employees. The 2030 census is now at risk because of this downsizing. Next slide. Data, as Beth indicated, data are disappearing. If you go to researchdata.gov, this tells you the data series that are no longer available. IRS statistics of income are postponed. There's a temporary pause on NCES data. The National Center for Education Statistics and the Center for Behavioral Health Statistics and Quality do no longer have data. So if you go to researchdata.gov, data is missing. Next slide, please. This is a figure from the Levenstein and Kubel article. So as of July, we had missing data on military and veterans affairs, climate and environment, science and research, health and healthcare, housing and community development, practically everything. Lots and lots of missing data. The Data Rescue Project is preserving data. Data on climate science and health are especially at risk. 2 weeks ago, the EPA announced that it was stopping collecting emissions data from polluters. Last week, it was announced, not in time for me to put this on the slides, but it was announced that the hunger survey put together by the USDA is no longer being collected. It's canceled, and those workers have been furloughed. Now, it's ironic, or not necessarily ironic, but it's problematic that we're not going to collect data on pollution. We're not going to collect data on hunger when policies have been implemented. So SNAP is going to be more difficult to get. I assume that as SNAP access is limited, food insecurity and hunger increase. We're not going to be able to measure that, the effect of the big, beautiful bill on hunger going forward. Next slide, please. We went to the Wayback Machine. It has versions of discontinued pages that were not shown on the January 12th version of the Wayback Machine, but they're listed on the January 27th. So as soon as the Trump administration came in, it appears that state statistics on employment by industry were no longer being collected. County and metropolitan statistical areas statistics on employment were no longer being calculated. State statistics on detailed farm income, county and metropolitan statistical area statistics on farm income, and county statistics on personal current transfer receipts no longer being collected as of January 27th, 2025. So these are local data that we watch and report on in the Kansas Statistical Abstract, and we use for our research and policy work that we no longer have access to. Next slide, please. I'm going to echo a lot of what Beth said previously. The American Community Survey does not do a good job of collecting data on rural areas. So this is a map of the state of Kansas. Anything in teal is reasonably reliable for percent of population with low or moderate income. Anything in purple is unusable. And anything in gray, which is the majority of the state, you have to use with caution because the variance in those data is so high. And this is using the 5-year sample. It doesn't look like there's going to be additional investment in the American Community Survey. And if that law passes that makes it optional, the quality of those data are going to suffer significantly. We won't be able to measure what's going on in our rural areas of the state. Next slide, please. There are many examples of delayed or discontinued data, and this predates the Trump administration. So current expenditures per pupil in public elementary and secondary schools has not been updated since 2021. Expenditures per pupil are relevant for public policy. This is data from the National Center for Education Statistics. You see variations in spending are likely also associated with variations in student achievement. Next slide, please. Another example, I study the economics of science, and data from the NSF on science and engineering degrees as a percentage of higher education degrees hasn't been updated since 2022. STEM degrees are high paying and important for innovation, and not being able to track that information means that we can't track how productive and scientific discovery going forward in these states. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, the U.S. has underinvested in data infrastructure. Survey response rates are down, as is data quality, just echoing what Beth said previously. Second, the federal government has eliminated so many workers that few people remain to vet data and process requests. State and local data are especially vulnerable to reductions in data collection efforts due to budgets and/or staffing. Why is this important? According to Lord Kelvin, if you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. And this type of measurement is key for understanding public policy going forward. Next slide. Thank you very much.
As well, thank you for your presentation. We really appreciate all the points that you shared with us, and it's helpful to know that our neighbor to the south is experiencing similar issues. So we're all in this together. So now we want to bring it back a little bit locally here, and we're going to start with Katie Thurber, Commissioner for the Nebraska Department of Labor.
Thank you. This is my first CPAR meeting, so thank you for welcoming to this. I'm excited to be a part of it. There's definitely a lot going on right now. So I also started with the same question. And I thought how to tackle this. So from my perspective, I live in okay, my agency produces a lot of data. How do we best utilize it? How do we make sure Nebraskans know what's available? And so what's causing some of the credibility issues? What's causing the growing skepticism? So let's start by a little overview of where we sit today. Here are just a few headlines that I pulled from the last month with a quick Google search. You can see White House blasts BLS revision showing almost 1 million fewer jobs than first reported. White House says job revision proves Biden economy a disaster. BLS is broken. Powell was too late. That's really encouraging when I have a BLS department that works on behalf of USDOL. Taxpayers need the BLS to stay out of politics, and BLS data is faulty, not rigged. So why wouldn't we trust the numbers? Well, let's dig a little into just what might be causing some of that skepticism, though, because it's definitely a growing trend. One of the first causes, well, not necessarily the attention-grabbing headline, is data collection issues. The numbers are only as strong as the data behind it. As a lot of the speakers have mentioned, we are surveying the same number of people as we have since the start, yet population has grown. We built a survey process around landlines. The world's more connected than ever in many ways, yet we're harder to reach and accurately sample. We have a lot of talent in blocking and ignoring calls to cell phones, myself included. A reluctance to click on emails and text links. So how do we reach people when you don't know that you can trust that we're reaching out to you and we are legitimate? There's less trust in general in unknown reach outs. And there's higher costs in mailing and in-person visits than there previously were. That all leads to participant burnout and higher fear. So we've discussed a lot today about declining response rates. That's part driven from the data collection issues, but you can see this is the current population survey. And it's one of the primary inputs for not only some of what was discussed today, but monthly labor force estimates. And as you can see, response rates have dropped from over 90% of people surveyed in 2013 to under 70 in 2025. And the CPS is not alone. Many surveys are seeing declining rates, which leads to less quality of data. In some cases, COVID accelerated the decline, but that's not the main cause. Many reasons for the decline are directly related to the data collection issues that we discussed previously, and increased costs, and the reluctance of people to provide information. So what do we do to reverse that trend? We're trying. Various techniques from different data surveyors, including education and marketing campaigns, incentives, and even making responses a legal requirement are all things my agency's tried. But what happens when you have the lower response rates? Well, some may interpret the lower response rates as lower data quality, and response rates are important, but there are other methods to control for lower response and still have the quality of information. One of the key pieces is educating and having meetings like this today so people understand truly what we're looking at when we're putting together trends and comparisons. And while the premise that response rates are declining, that's generally true. I'm proud to say Nebraska has bucked that trend in some important surveys. Nebraska's Occupational Employment and Wage Statistics Program, with a gentle nudge, I made it mandatory for employers. Staff have now done an excellent job collecting this data, and Nebraska's response rate has increased and is among the highest in the country now. So thank you to any employers who are here or participating virtually. It is really helping to protect our data quality in Nebraska. The next part of the question addressed the availability of data, and I think that Dr. Schaefer touched a little bit on this when she was speaking as well. But today the pace of data has just become overwhelming. So despite issues with data collection, we have more data available than ever before. So if you look every day, we produce from 2023, so it's only grown with the advent of AI, 402.74 million terabytes of data per day. That's a lot of data, and when you have that much data, how do you start to use it and organize it and analyze it in any sort of meaningful way? It's a big challenge that we are facing. So just what data is actually out there? Well, Facebook, X, or as I still manage to call it, Twitter, TikTok, Google, all produce data, but so do different agencies, including NDOL. And what's driving all of that data? Well, there's value. There's value in the information generated from these sites for all kinds of purposes. Just think about the details someone learns about you when you like a social media post. It can be setting you up to be targeted for sales from private companies and all sorts of things. NDOL is not that different, other than we don't really get money for it. We take the data we receive and we generate value, hopefully, for the state, hopefully for data scientists, hopefully for UNO and UNL. But we try and use it efficiently and effectively to minimize other reporting requirements. That's one of our approaches, is if we get data from the quarterly wage reports, how can we use that to not have to require additional reporting when response rates are so low? So we use this for performance reporting and verifying eligibility, cross matches with other agencies. But with our uses of the data, we can also monitor employment trends and predict future career demand. But having all this data is a great asset to a lot of people, but it causes issues as well. The information overload and cutting through the noise to find the right answer is really difficult. Asking the right question and verifying the source has become a critical component to truly understanding what you're talking about. But it's also created skepticism. It's pretty easy to ask the same question and get different answers, depending on where you look. And it's easier to find data to match your narrative. You start with a hypothesis, and if you don't truly go through the scientific analysis and follow the scientific method, then you can make the data fit your narrative easily. So an easy example of this is a pretty simple question. What's the average wage in Nebraska? Sounds easy, but if you call and ask my agency, will give you potentially one of three answers. It might be $29.98 per hour. Maybe it's $1,228 a week. Or is it $32.43 per hour? And if you ask ChatGPT, you'll get another series of answers. You'll get told that in 2025, it was approximately $1,082, and that's higher than the 2024 number of $1,227. And that the estimated annual average wage of roughly $63,000. And if you ask Microsoft Copilot, you get another series of answers. And so what is it that makes it this a problematic question? Well, there's lots of data points on the topic. A lot of people want to know what you might make if you are moving to Nebraska, how your salary compares to others in the state. And so it's easy to find data points to pull. What's difficult is when the question's that broad is to pull the right data points. If this had been asked with more clarifying details, I would bet we would have received more consistent answers. But what is it that makes the answers NDOL will provide credible to the end user and the recipient of the data? Well, I have a team of experts that can explain exactly how those three numbers are calculated. I think it's really important that the first presenter was able to explain the methods and the detail, because that's where you can start to see where there's room for improvement. If you don't understand the process, you're never going to see improved quality. The truth is, all three of the NDOL answers are valid, reliable data points, and we publish all of them. And so you could probably even find them on our website. But details about them are all included on this slide. I won't go into them. But each of these could actually be longer if I truly wanted to go into all the details in the data methodology. But I think the goal as the commissioner is that if this isn't clear, I want people to come and be able to ask my labor market team these questions about how we're doing our job and what is driving the answers. So how do we continue to protect the credibility of data? Well, credible data providers should provide details about the data, including the collection methodology, quality levels, comparability, and other info. For longitudinal data, this should include explanations about changes over time, and it's important to have the historical perspective. While it's often necessary to make the changes to the processes and procedures, it's important that those are communicated. These should always be openly communicated and explain any revisions to the data or create serious breaks. For example, the census questions, and this is highlighted in the first speaker, they used to actually ask about how many radios are in the house. And if you caught it this morning, they now ask about internet speed and computers. Another example, in recent BLS revisions, it's been all over the news. But that's a historical normal process that's been in place for a long time. But the magnitude of revisions always has been dependent on many factors. So in the case of growing skepticism, it was used to attack the credibility of data, despite the fact that all the details are readily available. So if we had done a better job of communicating and understanding that revision process, it might not have been the headline. But what more can we do? We can continue to improve on the data collection response rates and educate on the process and me. We also need to make sure we're asking the right questions. The next is to address the rapid change. Well, rapid is relative because a lot of the change, as highlighted before, is extremely fast, but it's not always fast. It's important to adapt and innovate, but systematic and intentional changes are needed. We also need to make sure we're seeking efficiencies and using the data already available to us. System changes take time to implement correctly, but they're often needed. And I think the census is a perfect example of that. As we're seeking efficiencies, it's an opportunity for change. Is to use the expanded available data sets. That gives you the triangulation concept that was discussed earlier today. The more we can incorporate the data available to us, the more comfortable and confident we are with the data. So at Labor, we've been using our wage records to meet data needs, and both internally and in partnership with other organizations. We also need to make sure that we maintain service levels to meet ongoing needs of the state. So sometimes that means intentionally slow changes. Many of you are familiar with the SOC and NAICS code systems that are used to organize occupations and industries. Those are only updated every 5 years, but there can be significant changes within that 5-year period. It's easy right now to think of AI and how that's changing the labor market. But for 5 years, you will not actually see a new occupation. While that can be frustrating, it's done by design so that it's done by design so that there's truly an understanding and a consistency and continuity of the data. So going forward, how does this impact the Nebraska Department of Labor, and what can we do to ensure our credibility? Well, we have an obligation to maintain the confidentiality of data reported to us. We take the same federal oath, I think they're the same, we take a federal oath to protect the data. And while there may be some skepticism to provide data in situations when you reach out, we encourage verification before providing any personal information. And we have several safeguards in place for our data systems. For published data, we run into the same issues discussed. We are very rural areas across the state, so we can't provide every detail. But we have tried to come up with ways to still make sure that there's coverage across the state, including our own surveys in partnership with the university systems. If there are questions about the data and definitions and methodology, please never hesitate to reach out to me, or better yet, my labor market team. They will know more of the details. But we also use data to meet different reporting requirements to be effective as possible. One example of where we're using our data to help move the state forward is with INSERS. We feed several data points, including our wage data, into the INSERS system so that there's longitudinal data across the state to measure the impact of training programs and education and where that's leading to employment and hopefully high wage careers. For data users, it's important to not just look at the data presented at face value. You need to look at the source, the methodology. Keep asking the questions and diving deeper. And how can you validate that data? When requesting the data, ask detailed questions and follow up. And understand what the data isn't showing. One indicator is not a complete data picture. And then in conclusion, I just wanted to share our vision statement for the agency. While our mission is connecting people to employment success, it's our vision to be a trusted source. And this only happens when having credible, reliable, available data that Nebraskans know and understand. So with that, thank you for your time today. The remaining stuff, just links if you want to look at them.
Thanks so much, Katie. We appreciate that and bringing it back home to Nebraska for us. And John, take it away.
Great. Great. There we go. Got it eventually. Great. Thanks again for having me. Looking forward to discussing this a little bit more. I think I'm going to bring it back to what Josie was talking about at the beginning of the morning here, and kind of focusing in a little bit more on the triangulation notion of data use and that sort of thing. So just the first, what's a standard disclaimer for us, but everything I'm going to share is just my view alone and not necessarily that of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, but the Federal Reserve System as a whole. So just to level set at the outset, the Omaha branch of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City is the state of Nebraska's connection to the central bank. So we're here in the city of Omaha. We cover the state of Nebraska, ultimately seeking to understand what's going on in the economy to best inform our policymaker, the President of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. What the Fed does, I'm sure many of you are aware of our primary function that's often covered in the media, setting interest rate policies. We also cover things like bank supervision and regulation, fostering and managing the payment system, that sort of thing. So what might not be as well known is that the Federal Reserve does not own or create much data at all. So really coming at this from a data user perspective rather than a data creator. So thinking about what this means over the course of our 110-year history, the Fed is actually intentionally structured to account for this incomplete, imperfect data world that we live in. We've lived in for 110 years, give or take a little bit. So I'll talk a little bit about the structure of the Fed, what that means, and then how we go about meeting some of our very discrete policy goals in this imperfect, incomplete data world. Again, to kind of bring it back to what Josie said a little bit earlier, it comes down to triangulation. When data quality in one set of sources becomes an issue, it's really important to be able to lean on other sources that we might have available to us. So to provide just a little bit more context about what the Federal Reserve is and what it does, the Federal Reserve Act was passed in 1913, and I could spend 90 minutes, I think, talking about the history of central banking because I'm a nerd like that. But it was intentionally structured after this, maybe 150, 175 years of history in the United States of what central banking should be, how we should manage a system of payments, that sort of thing across the country. There's a lot of unique history there, but it was intentionally structured this quasi-private structure that's intentionally diffuse and scattered across the country. So we have a regional structure. We have regional reserve banks. My employer is the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. That's a private employer, as well as a government agency that sits in Washington. So it's this dual quasi-private, quasi-public structure that helps us account for some perhaps variation in the data that we see and the methods in which we analyze data. You can foresee some problems that might arise from a central bank that is just headquartered in Washington and make decisions based on data alone without being necessarily out in the communities that we serve. Historically, again, I won't touch on the full series of history, but prior to the 1830s, we did have a central bank that was just located in Washington and New York. That created a lot of problems that we were kind of associated with the populist movements at the time. And that's ultimately why we arrived at this structure. But the structure is explicitly designed to account for the imperfections and incompleteness of the data world, and that's served us well over the last 110 plus years at this point. So as we talk about analyzing data and trying to make policies, I think one thing that's unique is that we have a very set policy calendar. So we make a policy decision about every 6 weeks in the interest rate realm based on two goals that have been explicitly given to us by Congress. So there's two very narrow problems that we're seeking to solve. And again, we have to make a policy decision every six weeks. So no matter what's kind of happening in the data world, we're stuck to this decision-making calendar. So the two mandates that have been given to us by Congress, you can see on the screen, but you'll often see reference in the press as well, maximum employment. So the highest level of employment or lowest level of unemployment that will not spur inflation. And then stable prices, so this inflation metric. So seeking an annual rate of change to the price level of about 2% over the longer run. So I'll call out a couple things when we're setting goals for making policy, and I think that holds for a lot of organizations out there. There's a specific set of precisions in our definition. So precision is unknown in several of these measures, so especially for employment. It can be a source of debate about what employment actually is. That notion of the highest level of employment that will not spur additional inflation. You can see how that would spur a lot of debate among policymakers and economists kind of across the country about what that is. So if we were to define that goal too precisely, we risk some unintended consequences we limit the flexibility that we might have as policymakers. We kind of limit our ability to respond to structural changes in the economy. If we were even more imprecise than this definition already is, we risk becoming having a goal that's not measurable, incorporating irrelevant measures, that sort of thing. When you're thinking from your specific organizations and using data, finding the appropriate level of precision in the goals that you're seeking to accomplish is also important in their definition. So I'll finish up just my brief comments by walking through one of these, walking through how we might seek to advise our policymaker on whether or not the economy is at full employment. So again, to get back to this notion of triangulation, in an environment where the quantitative data might be suspect or quality issues are on the rise, that sort of thing, we're trying to triangulate and use a variety of methods to answer this policy question, again, on a rolling approximately every 6 weeks basis. So we use a range of methods. We use quantitative data, often from government sources, sometimes purchased from private data providers, that sort of thing, in a quantitative measure. We have a quasi-quantitative measure, so we conduct our own surveys, and those are really the only unique data sources that the Federal Reserve System puts out. So most of the regional banks across the country will conduct surveys of businesses across a range of industries to gauge current conditions, and a little bit more quasi-quantitative than some of the government surveys that we might have talked about earlier this morning. And then a purely qualitative measure, so we have a range of business contexts across the state, across the region, across the country that we will formally interview on every policy cycle to get some qualitative measures, again, to ultimately triangulate how we're doing on our policy goals. So to first look at the purely quantitative measure, I'm showing an indicator that we often use to advise our policymaker, which combines many labor market indicators that you'll see in some of these government surveys. So this is available on our website. It's an aggregation of things that you will see frequently cited in the press. So things like the unemployment rate, the labor force participation rate, the job growth rate, into one single indicator that we then group into the level of employment activity and momentum. So this aggregation is 24 labor market variables in total, activity being a measure of current conditions, momentum being a measure of where we might be going. So alongside an unemployment level that is relatively low, measures of current conditions, again, the level in the blue line, suggests that we're relatively close to full employment, but this orange line suggests that the trend might not be our friend moving forward. So as we're seeking to evaluate the current environment to advise on where we might set policy, we might not have the clearest picture just by looking at the quantitative data here. So some pros to this purely quantitative look. It's relatively precise. We have a long time series available to us, some pretty robust documentation of where this is coming from. Some cons, it's all backward looking. The data lags, so if we're seeking to make a decision in the next six weeks, new data might not necessarily be available to us. So to try to bridge some of that gap, we look at some of our quasi-quantitative measures. Again, these are surveys that are conducted by reserve banks. So for us, we survey about 200 firms across these two industries, manufacturing and services, with pretty strong sample retention. Most of the indicators are put into diffusion indexes. So that's a measure of whether firms see conditions improving, not improving, or relatively remaining the same. So it's not a precise quantitative indicator that things like the CPS or the ACS might present. So the pros being here, a pretty timely indicator. Again, the cons, the lack of that context around what a specific response means for that certain business. So if we were to incorporate this kind of quasi-qualitative measure into our policy advising process, it lends some support to that momentum indicator that we would have seen before. So manufacturing firms in particular, more manufacturing firms than not are reporting that their headcounts are decreasing. in our geographic region, which is inclusive of Nebraska, but not contained just here in the state. So to fully become more as comfortable as possible with what we're going to put in front of a policymaker when he goes to prepare him to go to Washington to vote on interest rates, it's helpful for us then to complete the triangle and look at purely qualitative measures. So again, this is all for public consumption as well. Every 6 weeks or so, the Federal Reserve releases what it collects on a qualitative basis in a report called the Beige Book. So it's a collection of interviews that we will have in one-on-one conversations and roundtables, that sort of thing, with business contacts throughout the region, and summarizes how they would respond to a series of questions. Again, trying to encapsulate the how we're doing on some of our policy goals. So I won't read it to you there, but you can see some added context that we might get from talking to a business or an organization, a nonprofit, that sort of thing, and asking specifically, can you provide some more context? If employment conditions are a little weaker, why are they a little weaker? Trying to probe a little bit more in depth. So we get that additional nuance, we get that timeliness, can even be a little bit forward looking. So asking the business or an organization, how are you making decisions based on this information that you're observing in real time? The cons, obviously, it's not quantitative in nature, so it's harder to track over time and kind of build that longitudinal database. So if we triangulate all the factors and seek to inform our policymaker of how we doing on this employment goal, we'll probably say we're probably at full employment, but the full range of indicators suggests there's some risks to be made, particularly as we would say on the downside. So some of these less quantitative measures suggesting that there are risks or softness out there in the labor force that we should be monitoring moving forward. So I'll conclude there and take any other questions.
Thank you, John. Well, we are doing great on time, so I hope you were thinking about your question and writing it down. When does that ever happen when we have enough time for questions? So if you're a regular, you know what I mean by that. So if anybody has a question from the audience, I'd be happy to take that first.
I have some, but why don't you lead with a general question?
All right. So one of the things that I was thinking, and I'm a qualitative researcher, I just put that disclaimer out there, is that we have a contradiction here a little bit, right? So we had Mariana talk this morning, and I think she did a great job of outlining this process, and we know that we can trust it, and there is reliability in the census data that we see. But at the same time, we've heard from this panel all the challenges that are occurring in the federal statistical system, with exacerbated by budget cuts and staff cuts, and how we should be cautious when we interpret this data. So I think our practical answer is probably triangulation, which has been revealed. But I'm just wondering for all of our speakers, how do you kind of balance this, or how do you hold these two truths at the same time? How are we making sense of this when we can, or we have historically been able to trust federal data, and at the same time now we're interpreting it with caution? I think Beth and Donna are back. Maybe.
So I'll jump in first. Like how I would answer that is, I think even in an environment where particular data sources are the confidence is waning, we've always again had this imperfect data system. So it truly is about that kind of triangulation and checking with your qualitative sources to see, is the quantitative data even in the realm of what people are seeing on the ground, that sort of thing. And if they're not, then that causes, let's try to find 3 more quantitative sources that might be important to understand this clinical context. So
I can jump in and answer or sort of add to that. And I would say, as a data geek, I have always triangulated across sources. One of my early analyses was looking, and I love the 2010 census. It was incredibly good. To be able to count 300 million people almost exactly where they live was an amazing undertaking. But there are errors. In Southern California, we found places where houses were assigned to the middle of Interstate 5 freeway. So it's always been imperfect. I think the issue is the data good enough for the use that you have? So maybe what you need to know is the poverty rate higher than the national average in your community? And if it is, that's all. It doesn't matter whether it's 5 points higher or 7 points higher. If it's higher, then that's what you need to know. So I think part of it is understanding the use, and part of it is that looking at alternative data sources to see if you're getting similar signals from a variety of sources. And I think that's one of the ways in which state data is so important now. A lot of data, economic data, health data, housing data, states have, and some education data, states have robust data collections already. And so it's using those as one of the symptoms. If what the state is producing is showing something completely different than what the federal data are producing, then that's a sign for worry. But if they're both moving in the same direction, you're getting similar signals from both, then that's a sign that they're both probably in good enough shape for use.
I want to echo what Beth said about using state data. In the absence of federal data series being collected, using state data, using alternative methods to collect important data, such as the Million Prices Project, which is funded by the Sloan Foundation, which is actually going to the internet and collecting data on price changes that could be used to provide an alternative measure for the CPI. These are also opportunities to kind of look at and compare federal data sources to other data sources that are legitimate.
Yeah, I think it's understanding the complete picture and making sure, everyone touched on this, but it has been inconsistent for a long time. A revisions process exists for a reason, and it's because there's known inaccuracies, and it's okay to know that, and it's important to know that. I listened. I think Dr. Josie Schaefer said estimate every time she spoke. I was starting to count it almost. But the reality is,
I just do it by habit.
the reality is the data that I live in is all an estimate. And what estimate is ever perfect? And so it's important to know, before we release our news release, I get about an hour-long presentation that compares our data to what we're about to announce that comes from the feds.
Thank you. Anybody in the room? Yeah, right up here. Oh, hold on. Microphone.
Hello. Do you think, on that note, that there'll be a greater push for local data for like communities or foundations in a community to create the data that they can no longer find, or find what they consider like quality data?
I can say from a state perspective, the issue with local data and taking that approach is we're bound to confidentiality. And so it can be difficult to sometimes use our data to then compare, because we can't always release that even to the community itself. And so that's a problem. But when it's community driven and they are the ones doing it, that confidentiality doesn't apply to the local area themselves that gathers that data.
Yeah, I would just say more data is always good, right? I think that the challenge with relying on local data entirely, like data quality and data availability at the federal level, will fall off a cliff. You lose that easy comparability, and then the ease of just collecting. It's one of the biggest benefits of the federal data system is just the central nature of it. It's just to go and pull a bunch of data really easily. So having to rely on localities across the country would be a challenge. Would have to be but more data is not bad, so.
Anybody online?
I'll just add, this is a question I'm hearing in lots of conversations. I was at the Kids Count Data Institute last week with people from across the country, and they're wrestling with that same question about, do we need to move data collection to states? And I think it's a both and. Part of one of the challenges that I didn't hear either one of the other panelists say is there's cost implications. The federal data infrastructure seems expensive until you realize the magnitude of what they do. States trying to replicate their own data infrastructure means you lose those economies of scale. It's one of the nice things about having consistent data collection. On the flip side, you get better localized data about the things that are important to your community. So it may be a matter of we need both.
For 1 minute, because I have another one I think specific for you. Oh, sorry, Donna.
Okay. I just want to say that, you know, states are poorly equipped to collect their own data. They sit on a lot of administrative data that is very messy. It's very valuable, but messy and complicated, and needs, you know, some sort of expertise to clean, to make it usable and analogous to a federal statistical data series. So I don't think that states can fully step in. They can supplement, but they can't replace what the federal government does.
I want to come right back there in a second too. But though you mentioned non-response follow-up, and I actually wanted to talk about this morning with Mariana too. Can you just tell us a little bit about who is likely to not respond and need that follow-up? And then if we're not allowed to follow up as much, how that might bias some of our large federal surveys, particularly. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the easier way to answer it is to answer who is most likely to follow up. And the people who are most likely to follow up are a little bit older, homeowners in predominantly white suburban areas. So if you live in the suburbs, maybe your data would be fine after 2 contact attempts. But what we find is households with young children, less likely to follow up. Households that are renters, less likely to have responded by 2 follow-ups. Rural areas, people with limited mail or limited internet connectivity. So the challenges of data quality are both that we would lose data on people who are lower income, more likely to be renters, more likely to be rural. People living in tribal areas also have fairly low response rates, and we would lose data there as well.
Thank you. Katie, and then to an extent, Donna, I want to talk about this state data infrastructure. So I want to start by saying I use AnyWorks all the time from the Nebraska Department of Labor. Do other folks use it? Yeah, we have a little bit. It should be more. It's great. But that's exactly what I want to talk about. I think we do have access to a lot of data, both from the feds as well as locally collected, and we are creating infrastructure to put that data out, myself included, I would say in that. It's a challenge. It's a challenge, and it's a challenge to make it usable to a lot of people. And I think some of what you were talking about in that sort of credibility and trust really relates to, well, are people using it? Is it available? Is it accessible? Does it answer the questions folks have? And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you as a team take on that challenge, and then to what extent you feel that the state is consistently the resource for that kind of data.
Yeah, so I became permanent commissioner in April and interim in January. And shortly after I was announced as permanent, Governor Pillen came over to meet my team. And the first group that I introduced him to was my data team with all LMI, labor market information, because that is a division that literally was in the garden level, basement, of a separate building and doing their thing and doing it really, really well, but not going super noticed and not getting it out there and available in a way that is easy to digest. And so I wanted the governor to meet them and understand what all we have available to us. Because we're getting more and more data available to us, and we are getting better and better at cleaning it and developing our processes of smoothing it. Because the truth is, we used to get to be kind of lazy. The feds would do it all for us. We would send it to the feds and it would come back clean and pretty. Now, where we're reliant on our own as well as what the feds do, that process falls to us. And making sure that people can come and understand what we're putting out there and understand why, depending on which source, you might get a little bit of a different answer. I think that's one of the things we're really seeing right now is if you look at one of our labor market numbers, we have record high employment, and not only in the state, but in Omaha. Yet there's also a brain drain report, and there's a fear of, do we have enough people to fill jobs? And how do those reconcile? And the truth is, it all comes down to the understanding, but it also of the process and what data points we're looking at. But it also comes down to, well, are we really doing the best job of putting the right elements out there? We can just grab one and go with the story. We need to be able to explain what grabbing that one means. So we have a ways to go, but we're getting there. We're also working on making AnyWorks a little more accessible. They just updated to a new version about 2 weeks ago. And so we're trying to make it more accessible, and we're trying to understand more of what data not only should we put out there, but should go to answers. So we're very excited. We just started using DMV data to start closing a gap that's existed in who we have matches for. For those who don't know, we do everything out of the Social Security numbers of the Department of Labor. Department of Education avoids Social Security numbers. So how do you make our data fit their data? Has been a big gap in Nebraska, and we're using DMV records to start helping close that gap.
So I put something in the chat about the Coleridge Initiative. This is a nonprofit that has set up a secure data facility to assist states with their administrative data. It's coleridgeinitiative.org, and it's built with the understanding that it's very difficult to work with administrative data, but there's a lot of value in understanding and having high quality data. So as we think about the challenges with the federal statistical system, if states are interested in working with Coleridge, they're there to help.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. We have a question up here in the front.
Commissioner Thurber cited skepticism about potential scams as a response barrier. What are some effective methods that you've all found in the design of your survey outreach that may help combat that assumption?
I'll start. So we're not the feds, so we're not bound to that law. We're there looking at shortening the follow-up. So we follow up significantly more than we used to. But so with our surveys, we've also used the University of Nebraska to produce and send out the survey. And for some reason, when it comes from them, that's viewed as more trusted and reliable than when it comes from the state agency. So maybe you can tell me why. But so that's that's been a strategy that we've used for a while now. We're perfectly capable of sending out a survey monkey or doing something along those lines, but the response when it's from a university does still seem to be a little higher. But we call, occasionally we show up, though we try to avoid that. We're a pretty large geographic state, so that's hard. But we also advertise a lot. So we do labor shed studies, and before we start the labor shed study that's specific to a region in the state, we do press and we make it known that we're going to be conducting that in advance so people aren't surprised.
John, you want to go?
Sure. So like I said, we don't create a lot of our own data, but we do run surveys. And that's kind of a perpetual issue that we cover with our system colleagues kind of across the country about the best way to retain sample, that sort of thing. One of the most frequent things that we hear from, again, we survey businesses, so we're trying to maintain a representative sample across the industry mix, that sort of thing. So it's not as necessary for us to try to find as many, to build the sample size really large for balance more so. And retention is most people are more apt to kind of remain in the sample when they see how their responses are ultimately being used to impact policy. So the fact that we can point to a report that we write or a speech that a specific comment that we get from a survey tool is cited in a speech that a policymaker gives, those kind of feedback mechanisms are helpful for maintaining the retention of our samples.
Throw Donna on mine if you wanted to respond to that.
Oh, we don't really collect data. Survey response is a huge problem these days. There's a lot of survey fatigue.
Yes, thank you. Well, just first, thank you all for just sharing such great information today. To put it in context for business and community leaders and really just kind of drive it home, I'm wondering if each one of you could share one particular resource that you think may be underutilized for business leaders or community leaders that you would really hope we all walk away and help advocate for and start using to inform better decisions.
I think from the department's perspective, there's quite a few that I think are underutilized. So that starts with our poor advertisement. Some of it, we're working on it. But we do labor shed or labor availability studies that also have a skills gap study, and that is really valuable data. And it's done by region. And so that's some of the most localized data at a state level we can release. And it's very good. The other thing we do is in monthly trends that's kind of fun and just in general, a little more lighthearted than some of what we do. But it has really good analysis of where the state is headed in that.
Yeah, so trying to think through, I would honestly say if the community can better learn from each other. So we put out reports, various state agencies will put out reports, different nonprofits or think tanks. So I think we can do a better job of as a community of kind of keeping up the tabs on what research is out there. Oftentimes we don't have to reinvent the wheel on a lot of the analysis ourselves. There's been a really good report that's been put out by somebody else. So I think less of a data, I guess, underutilization story, but more of the underutilized analytical community.
So on the local level, we are thrilled and want to encourage everybody to use the Kansas Statistical Abstract because it really drills down into local and municipal data in the state of Kansas. And at the federal level, I work closely with the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics, and the surveys that they collect are jewels. They use the Survey of Doctorate Recipients, the National Survey of College Graduates. These data ask a really basic question about, are you using your degree in your job? And I think that that's one of the single most valuable survey questions from my perspective as a labor economist that's collected by the federal statistical agencies.
Asking me to pick one is like asking me to pick my favorite child. I don't know that I can do it. So I would just say, I think I would flip the question, and in thinking about advocating for data, there are tens of thousands of data sets across the federal statistical system. We've been talking mostly about jobs and American Community Survey and those and the education to workforce pipeline, but there is agricultural data and educational data and health data. pick the thing that is most critical to your work and start tracking that, so that if there is a risk of the survey being suspended, or maybe there's new methods, maybe there's an opportunity to advocate for bringing in administrative data and improving the estimates in some way, you'll know best which data set is most important to you. So.
The questions in the room, or Clay, you've got some online.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions from the Zoom chat. This is mostly for John. Nathan is curious about two things. He asks, one is the feedback at the Fed Listens events incorporated into the beige book.
That's, yes, in general, yes. So the Fed Listens are typically events where there's a Board of Governors member from Washington that comes and speaks to business leaders throughout the country. We do those much more frequently here just in our own community. So we'll host similar roundtables, similar open public forums, similar one-on-one business meetings, and that all gets incorporated into the beige book. Again, anonymized and that sort of thing, but that qualitative feedback is part of that process. So.
Great, thank you, John. Nathan's second question is that he notes that the various Fed locations, Kansas City, Chicago, Minneapolis, do their quarterly reporting of ag land values on different geographic scales. And he's curious why that is and why they're not consistent.
So without having the information in front of me, so most those surveys are all tied to the geographic regions that each reserve bank kind of covers. So again, kind of the arcane history of the Federal Reserve, the physical locations were established in 1913, kind of based on where the population was at the time. So district lines are really this monstrosity of a political compromise machine. So there's not a whole lot of rhyme or reason to why district lines exist that way. That's the regions that we're all responsible for. So that'll be the regions that those are all survey-based measures, and that's kind of why they report in those geographies. So there's been a persistent system effort to start aggregating those responses to get a national figure and a broader geographic coverage, but to some extent we're kind of limited to the constituency that we're mandated to serve.
Okay, we'll kind of do one last question to close out the day here, and I can't decide which one to choose. But so one of the things I was thinking was actually this summer I attended the Cleveland Fed Policy Summit, and they had a group presenting there called the Right Question Institute. So these people, I think they're based out of Boston, and it's all about asking the right question so that you can get to the data that you want. So it's a workshop. So I was just thinking, for all of you, our 4 data experts here, we talked about this, Katie brought it up, asking the right question. Some of your tips and tricks, strategies for us that we can leave with today. How do we ask the right question? Or if the data doesn't look right, what's the next question we ask?
Well, I think that starts by framing your question with an open mind. If you frame your question to steer towards an answer, it's going to be a poor question. And so I think that's a very important piece. Even if you have an idea of what the answer might be, you need to make sure your question is framed with an open mind. As far as the follow-up and the next steps, I think that comes from comparing to other data sets. So the first data set shows you A, the second data set shows you B. You probably need more detail, or you need to clarify the question you asked.
Yeah, I was in kind of building on that, defining. So having an open mind with your question, but making sure your goals are well defined. So I'm interested in the labor market. Like, okay, well, what like, are you interested in job growth? Are you interested in outcomes for certain populations within the state, that sort of thing. So I think providing some definition of where you want to go with your question helps narrow down the appropriate data source to use.
I can't be quiet. I was going to ask, you mentioned precision a lot in your presentation, and I think that point and just what you said is so important. A lot of people think these things are just obvious to everyone. Katie, and yours, right, the difference between industry and occupation, those are really different. And so of course we're going to get different answers, even though they have some of the same words in them. And I just see so much of that lost when we don't have that really good state infrastructure to put that data out and teach people and explain to folks what and why and how. So that precision piece being so important. Sorry. Go ahead.
I think that it's important, you know, in terms of data quality, you need to have a sense of what the data should look like. You know, you need to be familiar with the data so that when new data comes about on the same question, if there are jumps and unexpected changes, then that is a signal that there might be a problem with the data series. So you need to be familiar with the existing data that's collected before you actually think about the quality of the new data that comes in on that data series. And that's, you know, I work a lot with students, and that's really hard to sort of teach to people, kind of an intuition around data. And I think it takes a lot of practice. In terms of questions, you know, what is the right question? I don't have an answer. It's context specific, but I do have a process, right? I'm writing a survey for my colleagues at the university, and you know, my process is I draft a question and then I answer it and work out the kinks. And then I share it with a whole bunch of people and I vet it. And, you know, I get feedback and I say, is this the right question? Is this the right set of answers or suggestions? And so then I do a lot of work with, you know, screening and narrowing down, you know, you write survey fatigue is real. So if you're designing a survey, it needs to be short. Everything that you absolutely need has to be in there, and you have to be very, you have to be willing to cut and narrow and focus, and then you need to, you know, test it before you put it out there. So just don't write a survey and send it out. You need to, you know, iterate and refine so that it is really honed and really meets your needs. So that's a process about questions. That's not the question that I could ask.
Well, we love a process here, so that's perfect. And Beth, bring us home.
Sure. I'm going to bring you home with an anecdote. So I feel like answering questions is sort of the core of my career. And it's partly, it's what Donna alluded to about you get this sort of intuition about data. You start to learn what data sources are available. But the first 10 years of my career, I worked in a local government where we would get the wildest questions from people, including things like, how many dogs live within a half a mile of this address? I don't know the answer to that. I mean, so sometimes people come to you, or even we come ourselves with a very specific question in mind when a lot of it is sort of peeling it back and saying, do you really want to, what is it about this dog? Well, it turns out after a couple of additional probing questions, the person wanted to know if their dog walking business was going to be successful. I might answer that differently. I might come at that with, what's the socioeconomic status in the neighborhood? Do the households have the level of income that's going to support a dog walking service? Are there other dog walking businesses already in the area? And so it's not going in looking for a specific data point. It's taking that step back and thinking, what is the thing I'm trying to figure out? And then, as Donna was alluding to, like, think about what are the data sources. Are the data sources telling me the story I was expecting to see or not? If they're not, let me check another source and see if I'm also getting the same signal and direction from that one. And if that's the case, then maybe my intuition on that one was wrong and the direction is different than what I expected. It's that kind of an iterative. Don't start with the narrow focus question, start with the big picture question and drill down and come up with those alternative data sources to try to get at the answer.
Yeah, thank you. Please join me in thanking Beth, Donna, John, and Katie for their expertise and for sharing their time with us today. So, couple housekeeping housekeeping items before we wrap up today. So you should see on the screen the QR code. Again, this will take you to the webpage that has all of the presentation materials from today, and then the recording will be posted there when it's available, and we'll send you an email. You can also get the evaluation from that QR code in that webpage, so please take it. It really does help us inform the topics that we pick in the future. I want to thank our staff, Tara Grell, Clay Stevens in the back, who's been monitoring Zoom, all of our student research associates in the black shirt, and Dina Lund in the back as well for all their hard work today. Thank you to all of you for bearing with us with our tech issues. I would like to say we'll have it ironed out for next time, but you know we won't. So, but on behalf of our team, thanks so much for coming. We're going to do part 1 in January of 2026. So stay tuned for that. That will have some of the December ACS releases. So thanks so much for coming, and hope you have a great day.